So I have to do everything else that I want to do on the phone beside me. Otherwise, it just takes up too much of the processor. So I'm just going to share it off of here, send it off to Twitter, and we are good to go. And I've got the video pulled up, so if anybody tries to chat with us, anybody jumps in, they usually come in a little bit later. Most of our views actually come a little bit after the show because I'm not Ethan Van Sciver, nor am I anywhere near as eloquent as that umbrella guy. So we're still feeling our way around. But welcome everybody to the Critical Blast podcast, video chat, live stream, whatever you want to call it these days. Kids keep changing the names on us. And today we have with us Mr. Mike Barron, who is the writer of a lot of things. But for me personally, I became aware of you when I was in college. That would put it in around the mid 80s. And when I went to college, I was a huge comic book geek. Literally all my life. I learned to read off of comic books in kindergarten from a barbershop that would just throw them out. And for me, the big four were the only four comic book publishers in the world. And at least in my world, it was DC, Marvel, Richie Rich, and Archie. So when I got to college and I found that it was just the start of the direct sales market, and where I came from was a small town in Southern Illinois where they didn't have anything that sold comic books. Suddenly seeing imprints and heroes that I was never aware of, like Nexus and Badger and Rocketeer and all these other guys that were out here, it put a dent in my budget.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, I'm not. I was glad that it was money well spent. Starwoke Inc. Nico, thanks. Welcome to the chat. Hope you have a good time here. Got any questions, just pop them in here. So one of the things, and I want to talk about Badger a little bit because he's the one I know actually the least about, which is a shame because I thought he was always the coolest, but I could never find current issues coming in. But your take on The Flash was one that I was there right for the beginning. And you brought in some ideas. This was when Wally West was taking on the mantle. It was right after Crisis on Infinite Earths had happened. And your view on what would be a speedster, the caloric intake thing, that was you.
It was Newton.
Well, okay, there is that. But Barry Allen never had this brought up before that, hey, I've got to eat a lot. And you actually put all that science into the character.
Yes. It struck me that he was expending an awful lot of energy zipping around the world. And I just applied the laws of physics to it and the laws of energy, which is energy cannot be created. It can only be transformed. And I figured you got to pack on the calories because he's going to be burning them off awfully fast.
The thing that got me was, I'm always the pragmatist reading my comic books saying, okay, he's got to do this, but how come that? So I'm thinking, I'm watching Wally West pack down more hamburgers than Jughead Jones at Pop Tate's on a Friday night. And he gets up and he doesn't have a pot gut.
No, he's got a very fast metabolism.
I was like, okay, the mass has to go somewhere. He's got a hollow leg. But one of the other things, and this was even more impacting to me, was that Wally West didn't have a job. Now, Clark Kent had a reporter's job for a salary. Bruce Wayne was just filthy rich and didn't have to care about it. But a lot of these other heroes, you just didn't know what they were doing other than heroing to afford living the civilian lifestyle they had. And here you have the Flash being asked to run a heart across country. And for the first time he says, okay, what do I get for it?
Guess he was a mercenary bastard.
I loved it though. I mean, he's like, I need health insurance. And they're like, okay, fine, we'll treat you here. He gets beat up a lot. And it makes sense that, these guys needed to live as altruistic as they were.
Oh, thank you.
But the only time I'd ever seen that was Heroes for Hire, and it just wasn't played up with enough heroes. I think everyone else is just kind of their money's taken care of for them. I was, as a teenager, I was like, I wish my parents would both just die and leave me the fortune that comes with inheritance, so I could
No,
go
you
start my
don't.
superhero career. I had to be an orphan, obviously.
Oh, yeah, I know. The thing about comics is it's the most forgiving storytelling form there is. You can put things in a comic, and a reader will uncritically accept it, whereas he wouldn't accept it in any other medium. He'd just laugh it off. And the proof is that superheroes, you will believe a man can fly, but they only flew in comics for 30 or 40 years until the movies woke up and decided to transfer that property into a completely different form. So the people that did comics for all those years didn't take them seriously as storytelling. I'm sure they took their job seriously, and they wanted to seriously entertain. But if you look at comics, 90% of them are very silly, and they're not memorable. They don't create great writing. There are no lines in comics that stick out. The lines in comics that stick out to me, a lot of them were created by the great underground cartoonists of the 60s and 70s, guys like Spain Rodriguez and R. Crumb, Keep on Truckin'. They added to the lexicon that's eventually taken over all of society, so that even people who have no idea who R. Crumb is are familiar with the phrase keep on truckin', or Chuck the Duck says use the right tool for the job. I could probably summon up Crummisms all day.
Oh yeah, people who don't even know that they are the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers recognize the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers when they see them.
Right. Dope will get you 2 times of no money better than money will get you 2 times of no dope.
Oh, I love it. Now, of course, the thing about going back to that Flash for a minute here, I was looking forward to seeing that kind of interaction with more and more. I don't know, as the need arose, he's like, okay, now I need to get groceries this week. What, you need me to carry, some famine supplies to Africa? Great. Have a dinner ready when I get back. But instead, you went ahead and gave him the Bruce Wayne lifestyle. He won the lottery. Now, was that a directive saying, hey, we can't have a mercenary hero? Or was it like,
oh, no, all those ideas were totally my own. I had no editorial interference. It was a long time ago, and I haven't looked at those comics in a long time, but I've been writing. I've been writing consistently the whole time. So to go back there, I'd have to look at them to know what you're talking about, because otherwise I'm looking back over a landscape of several million words.
Oh yeah. You've got probably calluses on the end of your fingertips that I can only hope to achieve yet. But are you still wanting to do comics though? I mean,
oh, absolutely. In fact, I'm about to become very active, more so than I have been in decades. You all know Nexus is coming back from Dark Horse.
Yeah.
And I'm also launching 2 titles with Cautionary next month. I wrote them both. One is Offworlder, and one is The Wraith. And they're Ben Henderson's ideas, but they're my treatment. And he gave them to me and said, do what you like. And I did with them what I do with every title that I'm handed. I work up a very detailed outline. And then when he approves the outline, then I move to a finished product. And here, I'll tell you what they're about.
Yes, please do.
Where is it? Okay, they're kind of companion pieces. Here's Offworlder.
So they're in the same universe kind of thing?
Yeah. Offworlder is 7th century Scotland. Henry Gunn leads his clan in a ferocious battle with Viking invaders. But with victory in sight, he is ripped from space and time by an alien race. The Anunnaki seek a champion to stop another alien race from conquering all known space. Aided by the Egyptian goddess Serah, Gunn undergoes a hideous transformation, becoming something other than human, able to move through time and space at will, yet unable to save his wife and child. The fate of civilization rests on the shoulders of a troubled demigod, In the tradition of The Stars, My Destination, and The Silver Surfer, Offworlder is a star-spanning science fiction saga that will keep you riveted from first page to last. And that's not hyperbole. I'm very happy with my writing. Wait until you see the art by Jordi Armengol. It's unbelievable. I've been posting some of the art on my Facebook page, and Cautionary has been posting it on Twitter as well. And it will remind you of Barry Smith.
Oh, good.
And the other one is The Wraith, which is a companion piece. And again, this is another character that Ben created and turned over to me. Wait a minute, that ain't it. I'm looking for my blurbs.
Sure.
When I talk to young writers, I always say, "What's your story about?" And if they have to be ready and not just flail around. You got to be ready with a concise description. Here
You got to have the elevator speech.
Yeah. When Seminole policeman Patwin Gunn's wife Nina became pregnant, it was the happiest day of his life. But joy turned to sorrow when doctors diagnosed the unborn babe with an incurable heart condition. What would you do to save your child's life? Would you do anything? Gunn sets out on a seemingly hopeless quest to find Imagog, a mythical Latin American deity. Gunn's journey takes him to Honduras, a deadly encounter with bandits and the discovery of a lost temple in the forest. Here, against all odds, Patwin contacts the mythical deity, which agrees to save his wife and child on one condition. Gunn will become Imagog's avenging angel. All Gunn has to do is foment war, famine, pestilence, and death. But Imagog is not what he seems. He is the representative of an alien race with ulterior motives. The universe is not what it seems. And last but not least, Patwin Gunn is not what he seems. In the tradition of Michael Moorcock and Doctor Strange, the Wraith will take you to a place beyond space and time where the unbelievable becomes commonplace. Those are my little elevator pitches.
Yeah.
And while the ideas may seem familiar, to anyone who's read Stanley and Jack Kirby, the treatment is different. It's unique language, and it pops and crackles from panel to panel, which is my goal with everything I write. But beyond that, after that, we're launching a title called Florida Man.
I've seen the blurbs on this one, and I've seen a little bit of artwork. But please do elaborate on Florida Man. Rip from today's headlines.
Gary Duba's having a bad day. There's a snake in his toilet, a rabid raccoon in the yard, and his girl Crystal's in jail for getting naked at a Waffle House and licking the manager. With his best friend Floyd, Gary sets out to sell his prize Barry Bonds rookie card to raise $500 needed for bail. But things get out of hand. Now, if you've seen any of these Florida Man stories, which inundate the news, they will all be appearing in this comic, but it's, again, it's not what you seem. I think this is the finest comic I've ever written. And when you read it, you'll understand why. It's not just sneering at the rubes. I don't do that. But it's funny. It's laugh out loud funny. You will laugh.
Well, Florida Man has been begging to be a comic book for 10 years now, at the very least, because it's laughable how much that becomes a headline. You don't see Wisconsin Man or North Carolina Man. It's always been Florida Man, well, etc.
Yeah, you do see those occasionally, but I mean, Florida Man is just so ubiquitous that he's become a household name. And I've been hearing it on other medium all week long. Radio hosts talking about this crazy Florida guy's doing this or that, chasing customers out of a 7-Eleven with an alligator. And my favorite from a couple weeks ago is Florida Man defecates on traffic from light pole.
Okay, I can do without that panel if you can possibly avoid it. So you also said that Nexus is coming back from Dark Horse. Now, do you own Nexus, or does Dark Horse own Nexus?
Steve Root and I own Nexus.
Okay, so it's co-owned.
Yes.
Are you both coming back?
Yes, we're working on it together. Although Dude is the letterer, and he's also the co-writer. So keep that in mind when you read it.
Okay. Now, Nexus was one, again, because it was an independent title, and the shop that I went to didn't get them all the time. So if I couldn't get issue 1 through issue 100 and read them in sequence, I often passed on them. But I did see them. I was thumbed through them, but I didn't get what he was. So for everybody who hasn't read Nexus, and shame on us all, who is Nexus? What's his elevator pitch? What's Nexus's reason for being?
500 years in the future, Nexus is a reluctant executioner of mass murderers. He goes to sleep in an alien tank filled with alien fluids every night, and he's haunted by dreams of mass murderers committing hideous crimes. And when he wakes, he knows that he has to go after that murderer and execute him, or the dreams will recur and become more intense until they drive him mad. But there's also a good deal of world building here. We've been at it for so long that we've constructed a very elaborate alternative universe centered around Nexus planet of Ilum, which is short for asylum. And it's where all the flotsam and jetsam of the universe go seeking sanctuary. There's a lot of civics discussion. There are a lot of monstrous enemies. There's a lot of humor. We think of it as a space opera.
Okay, and now a Nexus literally is where everything comes together. So is he the center of some sort of force, or
he's the link between this alien race, which seeks to be the conscience of humanity, which is a crazy idea on the face of it. I mean, what business do they have deciding they're going to be our conscience? He's the intersection of this alien race and humanity. He's the link between the two.
Okay. Now, on the other end of the scale, and about the same time, you had this guy, the Badger. And this one I did read some of. Again, it's been a long time, but it got me that, to put on a superhero costume and go out into what was basically the real world. There were no flights. There were no bulletproof. You would have to be crazy. And of course, Badger was. Yeah. And it was a delightful take on what it would have to be, what someone would have to be a masked vigilante. So where did you pull this sort of thing from, and how did you pitch that to make it become a comic?
Well, originally I was working with Jeff Butler. I said, Jeff, do you want to do a comic? He said, yeah, I want to do a comic about these druids. I love druids, man. So I wrote this 10-page story about Ham the Weather Wizard. Then we took it to the publisher and we showed it to him. And Mill said, no, give us a costume crime fighter. And my reaction was, why would anybody put on a costume and fight crime? They'd have to be crazy. And that was a good idea. I said, well, yeah, he would be crazy. And I was reading a book, The Minds of Billy Milligan by Daniel Keyes. It was one of the early case studies of a multiple personality. And it seemed to click. And because we were from Wisconsin, it was Badger this and Badger that, I decided, well, I'm just going to make him the Badger.
Well, it definitely worked. And the whole crazy vigilante thing is, it worked for the Creeper, which would be a great little team up to see Creeper and Badger together. And it's obviously worked for Batman, even though he's a functioning psychopath. He's still an obsessed person who can't get past things and have a normal life.
Right.
It really gets into the mindset of what somebody would have to do to.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't. It's designed to entertain.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been times it's gotten very serious and grim, and I've done enough research on multiple personalities to present them accurately, I hope. But for the most part, we stick to the lighter side of things, and the Badger personality, which is a joker, a disruptor.
Is there any hope that we'll be seeing the Badger come back?
Well, we're always working on it. I have a new scenario developed that's really good, and the problem is just getting the publisher's attention, because unlike Nexus, I don't own the Badger. I signed all the rights away, and they're owned by First Comics. And if you're interested in seeing Badger, please write First Comics. They have a big online presence, and say you want to see more Badger.
I didn't even know that there was still a First Comics.
Yes,
I thought they had gone under.
Yep.
Well, welcome back, First Comics, and get some of your fans back here by putting out some Badger for us, because we will flock back to you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we comic geeks are a nostalgic bunch.
I know.
In fact, it's no surprise, I'm sure, to you that a lot of the nostalgic comic people are not happy with the comic books of today. And there's this whole Comicsgate thing going on. And, hello, I'm RJ Carter. And yes, if you've seen me on Twitter, you know I probably side with the Comicsgate people more than not, because I just do. I feel like I was pushed into it more than I joined it because of the activities.
I know that feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much that I'm like, yeah, I'm attracted to $25 comic books that come out once every 6 months, as much as I was repulsed by the people who were basically mocking and ridiculing them. I'm like, well, they're putting out a good product. They're not really bothering people here. They just don't like what's being done. You told them to make comics, so they did. The question I had, because I've followed your posts as well on Twitter, we follow each other. Do you consider yourself Comicsgate, or do you consider yourself adjacent or not even attached to it, just kind of following it amusedly?
Absolutely not. I am not part of Comicsgate. I know some of those folks and I sympathize with them, but I reject the label. It's not a label I would choose. It's a silly label. And to me, it just means that people are rebelling against heavy-handed preaching in comics and social messages by writers who forget that the writer's first duty is to entertain. And I think every writer should have that branded on their forehead in reverse, so when they look in the mirror that they will see it. But that's the writer's first duty. The comic has to entertain first before you can do anything else. But that's really what you should be doing. That's all you should be doing, which doesn't mean you need to hide your worldview. It's just that my goal is always to grab the reader by the throat and drag him into the narrative so that he's not aware that he's experiencing artifice. So that if somebody comes in and interrupts him while he's reading the comic, he waves his arm frantically and go back, wait until I finish this comic book. That's storytelling. That's what I try to achieve in my comics and my novels.
And there are, the one thing that people bring up is that, when you argue, hey, there's too much heavy-handed politics in comics, the argument comes back, well, there's always been politics in comics.
Well, that's true, but the part of the difference is to show, don't tell. And in the old days, I think Stan Lee had a good hand on that. He didn't lecture the audience. Occasionally, he would throw in a message of inclusion and peace, but for the most part, he would show his actors leading by example. But when the action stops for a lecture, and I've seen a lot of lectures in comics lately,
I know,
aimed at specific elements of the population, it's just a big turnoff. As Samuel Goldwyn said, if you want to send a message, call Western Union.
Exactly. And I remember in the 80s and earlier, 70s and 80s, reading DC Comics, because that's what I could get my hands on the easiest at yard sales and barbershops. There was a mix of politics in the characters. In the Justice League, it was common to have Green Arrow and Hawkman basically go toe-to-toe and fist-to-fist with each other, because Green Arrow was a liberal and Hawkman was a conservative. And it wasn't just that, that Green Arrow was like, yeah, I kind of want to pay more taxes to help more people, and that Hawkman was like, yeah, I kind of want somebody who's going to side a little bit more on the Supreme Court to go along with this rule or that rule. They were the hard extreme ends of each of their philosophies, and that's what caused so much of their conflagration.
Yeah, but that was also better entertaining. I mean, bickering can be entertaining. And then Denny O'Neil went very heavy on the social message with Green Arrow and Green Lantern. And Denny and I have had many talks about that. And at one point he said, I think that maybe that that the antics of radicals during the 60s have led to today's incivility.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fairly uncivil time in the 60s.
It's much worse now.
It is much worse now. I say it's much worse now, but I don't know. We haven't really had a Kent State, and I pray to God we don't. But maybe it's just as bad now, but we're paying more attention to it because we've all this social media coverage of everything.
Well, I think we've had 10 times Kent State, but it's going in the other direction where Jews are being attacked on campuses every day.
Oh yeah.
Boys with MAGA caps are being attacked.
No disagreement from me here, because you're right. There is that. I was obviously coming at it from the point of view of authorities coming down on the protest, but
I think we've had a complete inversion now, and the radicals of the 60s are in charge.
That's true, because the authorities do tend to sit it out, don't they? They just kind of watch on the sidelines until it's all over. I mean, and I think the tipping point for that probably wasn't all that long ago. I was living in St. Louis when Ferguson went down, and it was a very, very scary week. And to see that the police and the firemen were trying to do their jobs and then got excoriated for doing it, I think that was pretty much the turnaround point where law enforcement said, okay, when people start fighting in the streets, sit back and wait till they're done and then clean up.
Oh, yeah. Well, the trick is always finding a balance between personal liberty and authority of the state. Government's just one of those necessary evils. The libertarians and the anarchists will say, we don't need no stinking government. But people are being human nature, people being people. They're going to get together and form committees and create policy for their own neighborhoods. It's going to go from there. It's just what people do. It's part of the human condition. I'm not sure. It's far from ideal, but the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are probably the most perfect political documents ever created, because those guys were smart, and they weren't professional politicians. They weren't career politicians. They were farmers and printers, and they expected to do their job and then go back to their private lives. And they were smart people, just like Orwell. They understood human nature, and they anticipated all the assaults on the Constitution that are going on today.
Yeah, I'd sometimes, fantasize about having a time machine and bringing some of them forward, saying, hey, this thing here, they're misinterpreting it. Can you make it a little bit more clearer?
Yeah, right.
or how do you feel about this? But I'm afraid they'd go back and say, screw the whole thing, we're doomed. But when people do get frustrated with the way things are going in society, or the way that laws are being handled or mishandled, or what you can or can't do because of the restrictions and strictures of the Constitution itself, that's when we come up with these imaginary scenarios of people who aren't bound by those rules. That's when we get the vigilante. And it's a very appealing kind of hero.
The Punisher.
Who can just do what he wants.
Are you there?
I'm here. I think you were going.
Yeah, I just said the Punisher. I keep hearing a weird boinging sound.
Oh goodness, I don't hear it. Must be the clock on your end. Yeah, the Punisher. Well, I'm writing. I'm a writer on the Remo Williams The Destroyer series by Warren Murphy and Dick Sapir. I'm blessed to have that position.
What's happening?
Can you hear me now? Okay, well, I will just put my lips a little closer to the microphone here, and we'll get intimate. But I was saying that I'm blessed to have this writing position where I'm getting to write stories for Remo Williams, The Destroyer, created by Warren Murphy and Richard Sapir. And his whole reason for being was to, one floor elevator speech here, he protects the Constitution by violating it regularly.
You there?
I'm here. I can hear you scratching at the microphone. I just didn't know if you could hear me.
Yeah, I
talking.
do, but there's this weird boinging thing, and then your voice drops out. But I think I got the gist of it. And I have a Remo Williams novel ready to go. And they just...
I have heard rumblings of it, but I have not heard any details.
I'm very happy with it. It's called Groovers, which stands for get rid of our vile, evil rules. And it's a group of people who don't like the way things are. When I prepared for this, I read some of the original Destroyers, which I'd read way back in the day, and I realized that they were all satires. So I asked Devin Murphy, I said, well, how far do you want to push this? And he said, you go all the way. So this is a savage satire. You will laugh until you cry. And it's about the bad guys based on George Soros, but it's really very funny. And it's about conflicting special interest groups and how Remo and Chun navigate those people to get to their goals.
Yeah, the satire in the Destroyer was really what attracted it to me. I'm new-ish to the Destroyer, whereas I was doing book reviews for the Critical Blast website. Back then, it was the Trades. It was owned by somebody else, and somebody came up to me at work and said, "Hey, are you going to review the new Destroyer books from Tor?" I'm like, "Well, first of all, what's the Destroyer, and second of all, why would that fit in with my geek culture, pop culture mindset here?" So he made sure I got those Tor books, and I just fell in love with them. And it just happened to come along at the same time that they were doing the More Blood anthology for fans to write their own Destroyer stories. So I'm like, okay, I'll take a shot at this. And I did all the characters in the Remo Williams universe and the core characters of a comic book company's universe about a masked vigilante who likes to intimidate people by dressing up like a nocturnal creature that flies. And I took all the trademarks off of it, and it got picked up into the anthology and was sort of my foot in the door to writing the novels that I'm writing now.
Are you writing a Destroyer novel?
I have written the last two of them, and I am working on a new one right now.
You must send them to me.
Well, I'll be happy to. We'll work that out.
All right.
I'll get you some copies out your way. But it was fun to do the banter and the interactions of Remo Williams and Batman together. I even basically had Chun having been Bruce Wayne's trainer for a little bit while Bruce was traveling the world trying to learn this and learn that. And I had written this with like no concept of the old Destroyer series. All I had was the Tor 4. And I was like, well, I'll just go with what I know. And it was fan fiction. It was fun fiction. But when I was sitting down to get this ready and knew I was going to mention this to you, I got to thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be fun if, we were able to do something like that again in an anthology, and you were able to do a Remo Badger crossover, which is why I made the little video that went on Twitter that looked like that. But how would you work something like that?
Howard, you're going to have to repeat that because it's like there's something going on here. I'm only hearing like 1 out of every 3 seconds that you're speaking.
Oh, if that's happening to you, I bet it's happening to everyone else too. I bet it's this lousy Wi-Fi connection that I've got. Basically, I was just wondering if you had the opportunity to do a similar kind of crossover story like I did with the Remo and Batman story and More Blood, and you were able to do a Remo Badger kind of story. Is that something that would appeal to you?
I could make it work. I've heard crazier ideas.
Sure. I just thought it sounded fun. But you write a lot of action heroes and not all the comic book stuff. I mean, you got a whole series of novels.
Yes,
the Biker
there are
series.
4 out now, and there are 7 complete. Bikers, the first one is about Josh Pratt, a reformed motorcycle hoodlum who goes to prison. He gets religion. He comes out determined to turn his life around and ends up delivering summons for lawyers. It's the only work he can get. But people keep coming to him with their problems because he knows how to get things done. He's one of those guys who straddles the edge of society and barbarity, but he's got a good heart. So he always works on the side of good. The second one is called Sons of Privilege, and it's about college students being found drowned after a night of drinking, all outstanding athletes. It's based on a real case. The smiley face killings. And if you Google the smiley face killings, you'll learn that the FBI had a special task force working on them for years. And this is about the smiley face killings, who's really behind it. The third one, Not Fade Away, is about a woman living in a trailer court who was once the lover of a great musician who died in a club fire. And she says that the song that he wrote, Marissa, which she now hears being used by an insurance company, belongs to her, that he gave it to her. And she shows Josh this handwritten deed, which says, I wrote this song for my love, Marissa, and it belongs to her. I cede all rights to her. And all she's got is this wrinkled paper, and he has to prove that the song really does belong to her. And it takes him on an amazing journey and a couple of encounters with savage killers. The fourth one, Sons of Bitches, is about a woman who puts out a Muhammad comic. The fifth one, Buffalo Hump, is about a charismatic Sioux blues musician who agrees to open a new casino in South Dakota, which one half the tribe bitterly opposes. And Josh is hired to protect him from assassins. And the sixth one is Bloodline, and it's about how Josh infiltrates a paramilitary motorcycle gang that deals guns. And the seventh one, Bloodline, is about how Josh's worthless father comes back into his life and wreaks havoc with him.
Yeah, well, when you first described Joss, one of the things you said was that he straddles that line. I think for me, and maybe you have a different opinion, I think for me, what makes a good action hero, not necessarily the comic book vigilante, but the action hero like Joss or like Remo or like not the Destroyer, the Executioner, these guys who just do it. I think a lot of people want a benevolent dictator.
I think, first of all, the audience wants someone with whom they can identify. And secondly, yes, they want the scales of justice to be observed. They want good to triumph and evil to suffer. And third, they want a dynamic action story. And I start with those before those are always in my mind. I don't write them down because they're ingrained in me. And as I say, my goal is always to grab the reader by the throat. And there are many ways to do that. And in fact, I'm going to be offering a writing course on how to do that.
We would definitely love to promote that.
Well, thank you.
Because I think I definitely struggle sometimes with, the hook.
Yeah. I'm going to be like the man's Neil Gaiman. The poor man's Neil Gaiman.
I was going to say, I was a huge Neil Gaiman head back when Sandman came out, and I was just, that was my voice when I was struggling short story writer, trying to write things. I would grab a Sandman book and I would just read a couple issues for the first 2 hours before I'd sit down and start writing, because now I've got the Neil Gaiman voice going. Right. But lately, I've not been as attracted to the work. Nothing against the man. It's just, the books that have come out. I'm like, I'm getting a couple chapters in. Yeah, it's not really for me anymore. I think I've grown.
I'm always reading 5 books at once, and 2 of those books I won't finish. I've gotten through 80% of a book and just decided, I don't care, and I set it aside and I sell it.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be willing to walk away from them. It's harder for me because I still do the book reviews, but I've found that a lot of the better, more entertaining books that I read these days come from not mainstream sources. I've been digging the hell out of this Angst series from David Peterson, which is, it's a medieval kind of fantasy, but the main character Angst is 45 years old before he goes on his adventuring thing. So he's got, he can't sleep on the ground. It hurts his back. He's a little bit overweight. His buddies and him drink a little bit too much at night, but they've still got to take the giant sword and save the country from the magical invasion that's happening, because it can only be them. He's been chosen. He's like, it's a midlife crisis in medieval times. and it's funny as hell, but it's also it's very touching. It's very dramatic. Uh, Peterson's just really got a handle on his character. And I told him when he sent the last book out over to me, the last book's title is Dying with Angst. I'm like, this better not end the way this title tells me it's going to end, because I will have to come pay you a visit.
Is Angst the character's name?
Angst is the character's name. The first book is Angst, and I think there's drowning in angst, buried with angst, and that's his whole. He's a magic user. He can move rocks and form rocks, but yeah, he's got this whole existential crisis going on the whole time, and it's not overplayed. He's a bit of a flirt, and he's married, so there's all that coming into play. He's not in love with the princess who sends him on the quest, but they definitely they've slept in the same bed together, sometimes without clothes. So it's pushing their line very, very strongly. And he struggles with that while he's still trying to remain faithful to his wife. Each one's like about 450 pages, so they're bricks, but they're grab you by the throat and drag you through the book bricks. So
yeah.
So what will you have? You told us about the comics you got coming from Cautionary, and we're going to link to those when I embed this into the actual article that'll bring people to the website.
Let me know if you need any art.
Yes, please do send art. We'll be happy to put some art into that article. What do you got coming out, if anything, in the novel form?
What do you know about Disco?
I do not know about Disco. I thought it was dead.
No, Disco is very much alive. I've been posting a lot about it on Twitter. It's my novel about a boy who raises a pup to be world disc dog champion. And Liberty Island published it around the first of the year. And it's doing very well. It's a different book for me because it's a heartwarming story for the whole family. And the reason I wrote it is because I asked my wife, Ann, if she'd like to read one of my novels. And she said, well, I can't read any of that stuff. It's too gruesome. Write something I can read. And Disco is the result.
Yeah, my wife is the same way. I think the only book she reads of mine is the first one I did, which was a children's novel, Alice's Journey Beyond the Moon, because it was the third book in the Lewis Carroll Alice series. She's like, write more children's books, write more like that. I'm like, yeah, but you know what? I make more off of one Destroyer book, first installment, that I made the entire lifetime of the Alice series going out. So I think I'll go with what I know now. So is Disco a series, or is just
a one-off book?
A one-off book.
Yeah.
That's good. Is it difficult to switch voice when you're going from what your usual oeuvre is with the action to go to something more heartwarming and
no,
like that?
Not at all. Because I put myself in the protagonist's head, and that's the job of every good writer is imagination. Basically, you have to imagine your protagonist, not just your protagonist, but you have to put yourself in the point of view of every person in that story.
Yes. And then you've got to come away with it without having put yourself into the story.
Oh, right. Ideally, the narrator remains invisible. Now, there are always exceptions to this. For instance, books told in the first person. But often that's artifice too, because the first person is nothing like the author. I'm looking at a John D. MacDonald, Travis McGee novel right now. And he's my inspiration, the main reason I'm writing today. And I've read quite a lot about him. And of course, John D. MacDonald was nothing like Travis McGee. And yet Travis McGee is a totally credible and appealing character. And the inspiration for Josh Pratt, my biker guy.
We all have our inspirations. I would have a list longer than my arm if I tried to list all the people who inspired me to write. One of them I actually still talk to today, Troy Reiser, was a writer when he and I were younger and worked at the same place. We're Twitter buddies now. I can safely say that if it weren't for him going over my work and giving me some pretty harsh criticism and telling me what I was doing wrong pretty much all the time with what he was reading when I gave him, I would not be writing today.
We all have gurus.
Yes, we do. And hopefully, if we're doing our job right, we'll become the next round of gurus. I don't know if anybody's going to be looking at R.J. Carter's stuff in the future and saying, yeah, I want to write like him. But who knows? I've still got a few years left in me for that to happen. Well, Mike, I'm going to be wrapping this up here, and I just want to find out if there's anything that you wanted to come in and talk about that you were waiting for me to bring up that I've been beating around the bush on or just hadn't addressed correctly.
No.
Okay. We've covered it all. So want to remind everybody, Nexus is coming back. Mike is doing 2 series for Cautionary Comics. You definitely want 3.
Florida Man is the 3rd.
I forgot Florida Man. Yes, I got the 2 partners, and then I forgot the 2 companion pieces, and then I forgot about Florida Man. Yes, 3 comics from Cautionary Comics. So now, are these crowdfunded, or are these just?
They will be crowdfunded. They're going to start crowdfunding at the end of this month for Offworlder and the Wraith. And if you've seen Chuck Dixon's Ravager, you know what to expect.
Yes.
And we will exceed your expectations.
Chuck's another guy I got to get on here sometime and talk with him a little bit. Maybe after we get this move done. We're in the middle of a relocation right now. Right now, I'm broadcasting to you from the glorious and spacious residence in Waco by Marriott here in Waco, Texas, where I've been living the last 7 months. But that's all coming to an end next month. We're going to be another home-based business again, largely thanks to people who have donated through our Indiegogo and taken advantage of some of the book sales going on there. And that is going to be linked in our description. It already is if you're listening and looking down there. And thank you for participating. Mike, thank you so much for coming over here and talking with us. Appreciate it very much. And maybe we'll have to do this again several months down the road.
You bet.
Get some new stuff, especially when those Cautionary Comics are coming out.
Okay. Thanks, Howard.
Thank you.